She was frail, quiet, and barely able to walk to her seat in the back of the plane, until a stranger from first class stood up and did something no one expected. But what she revealed after that left him stunned, holding a card that could change countless lives. And it all started with just one seat. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, like the video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now let's jump into the story. Theo Barrett didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in planning, control, and clean design. As a successful architect, he'd spent his life shaping cities to perfection. Glass towers, smooth corners, clean skylines. Chaos, discomfort, or surprises had no place in his world. Especially not on airplanes. He always flew first class. It wasn't about luxury. It was about peace. The wide seat, the silence, the soft lighting. No crying babies, no tight legroom, just calm, just quiet. On this day, Theo was flying from Amsterdam to Johannesburg after a long conference. He was tired but calm. He checked in early, skipped the line, and sipped mint tea in the lounge while checking the latest numbers from a housing project in Lagos. Just another day. Just another flight. Seat 2A was his usual pick, right by the window, not too close to the galley. A glass of sparkling water was already waiting. He slipped off his shoes, stretched his long legs, and put on his noise-canceling headphones. Classical. Music, nothing dramatic. Just background calm. Then he noticed something. It was subtle at first, a break in the boarding rhythm. People turning around in the aisle, the hush of voices dropping to whispers. A pause. Theo lifted one earphone. There, near the middle of the plane, a woman was slowly making her way forward. She was elderly, probably in her 80s, thin but proud. She wore a long navy blue skirt, a white blouse, and a carefully tied scarf around her head. Her cane tapped lightly on the floor with each step. Her other hand trembled as she held onto a young flight attendant for balance. The passengers around her grew silent. Some were annoyed. Others just watched. Theo's eyes narrowed. Something didn't feel right. The woman looked tired, almost fragile. Her seat, it seemed, was far back, deep into the economy section. The kind of seat no one wanted. One of those tight, cramped ones near the toilet, with no space to stretch. She paused, her face confused, as if her body didn't agree with her plans. The attendant bent down, whispered something. The woman looked at the seat, then at the long aisle ahead, then back toward the door. Her lips moved. Maybe a quiet, "I can't." Theo didn't think. He stood. The move was automatic. No, second-guessing. He walked toward them slowly but steadily. "Excuse me," he said to the attendant, calm and clear. "Would you please switch her seat with mine?" The young woman blinked. "Sir?" Theo nodded, pointing gently at the older woman. "She can't sit there for 12 hours. Give her my seat. I'll take hers." The attendant hesitated. "You're in 2A, sir. First class." "I'm aware," Theo said, taking off his jacket. "She needs it more than I do." A few nearby passengers shifted in their seats. Someone chuckled behind him. One man muttered something about rich people showing off. But Theo didn't care. He offered his arm gently to the woman. "Shall we?" She looked up at him, eyes searching. Not confused now, but something else. Curious. Warm. "You're giving up your seat?" she asked, voice soft as a sigh. Theo gave a small smile. "It's just a seat." The woman nodded, her lips forming a small, grateful smile. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Together they walked to the front. Theo helped her ease into the seat. The flight crew quickly brought her tea and a warm blanket. She didn't speak again. She just closed her eyes, head resting against the window, her breathing slowing. Theo returned to the back of the plane, now seat 47C. It was everything first class wasn't. Noisy, cramped, a little sticky. His knees touched the seat in front of him. A baby was crying 2 rows down, but strangely, he didn't mind. He settled in, letting the moment wash over him. For the first time in a while, he felt grounded, present. The woman beside him smiled politely. She handed him a biscuit from her small bag. Theo accepted it with a nod. Not many people would have done that, she said gently. It wasn't planned, Theo replied. Just felt like the right thing. The plane began to move, the cabin lights dimming as the engines hummed to life. Outside, the clouds shifted, and the sky turned orange with the sunset. Up front, the elderly woman rested peacefully, unaware that her quiet presence had stirred something deep in a man who usually avoided emotion like turbulence. Theo leaned back in his narrow seat and closed his eyes. For once, he wasn't thinking about deadlines or meetings. He was thinking about her eyes, that calm voice, and why her words had stayed with him. You remind me of someone. But who? And why did it matter? He didn't know it yet. But this small act, just a seat, was about to lead him somewhere far more important than Johannesburg. It would lead him to something he didn't even know he was looking for. Meaning. Theo Barrett had always lived in comfort, but he never realized how small a seat could feel until he squeezed into 47C. The back of the plane wasn't quiet. It wasn't calm. It was a whole different world. A baby was crying a few rows behind him. Someone's phone was still playing loud music during takeoff. The overhead bins barely closed. There was no polished glassware here, just thin plastic, cups and elbow-to-elbow passengers trying to find sleep. The tray table in front of him had gum stuck underneath. The seat wouldn't recline properly. His knees were pressed into the back of the seat ahead. The man beside him was already asleep, snoring lightly. A woman across the aisle was trying to soothe her toddler, rocking him gently while murmuring a lullaby. Theo just sat there, staring forward, unsure what to do with his arms. He glanced out the window, but all he saw was darkness and the reflection of his own face. Still, he didn't regret giving up his seat. He kept thinking about the woman, Ruth. She hadn't said much, but her presence stayed with him. Something about the way she touched his wrist, the quiet weight in her voice, how she had looked at him not like a stranger, but like someone she remembered, someone important. He didn't understand it, but it lingered. As the flight settled into its rhythm, a flight attendant passed through with the dinner cart. In economy, the choices were simple: pasta or chicken. Theo wasn't hungry. He shook his head politely and passed on the meal. The woman next to him, an older traveler with short curly hair and kind eyes, noticed. No appetite? She asked, pulling out a small paper bag from her purse. Not really, Theo replied. She opened the bag and offered him a biscuit. It was homemade, wrapped in a napkin. Try this, my granddaughter baked them. She'd be thrilled to know someone from Amsterdam liked her cooking. Theo took it, surprised. Thank you. He took a bite. It was soft, buttery, just a little sweet. Good, isn't it? She smiled. It is, Theo said. Tell her she's got talent. The woman chuckled and leaned back, resting her head. Theo returned to his thoughts. He wondered again about Ruth. Was she asleep now? Had she eaten? Was she feeling better? Something about her calm eyes stayed with him, like a story he hadn't heard yet. He tried to sleep, but the armrest dug into his side. The hum of the engines was loud here. Not peaceful, just constant. The kind of sound that reminded him of subway stations and construction sites. Still, despite the noise and the stiffness in his back, he didn't feel frustrated. Oddly, he felt present, the way he hadn't felt in years, maybe longer. For years, he'd measured time in deadlines, meetings, blueprints, and flights. Everything had been about forward motion. But now, somewhere between continents, in the back of a plane where no one knew his name, Theo felt still, not stuck, just still. And that stillness brought a strange comfort. Somewhere in the cabin, a child started to cry. The mother's soft voice tried to calm him. The lights dimmed as the plane moved into night mode. A few overhead reading lights stayed on. Most flicked off. Theo looked out again. The sky was dark, but tiny stars twinkled beyond the glass. In His old seat, he would have pulled the shade down, closed off the world. But now he watched. The minutes passed like waves. Nothing big, nothing urgent. Just small details he'd never bothered to notice before. The soft breathing of people asleep, the rustle of pages turning, the tiny cough of someone 3 rows away. And then, without really thinking about it, he got up. He walked slowly down the aisle, stretching his legs, pretending to go nowhere in particular. But he found himself pausing at the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the plane. He didn't go in. He just stood there, peeking through the small opening in the fabric. There she was, Ruth. She was awake. A warm cup of water rested on her tray. Her head leaned back slightly, her scarf still neatly tied, her posture graceful despite the years, carved into her bones. She saw him, and she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people give to strangers. It was knowing, calm, like she'd been waiting for him to look. She raised a hand and gestured to the seat next to her. It was empty. "Come sit," her eyes seemed to say. Theo hesitated. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he didn't want to intrude. Maybe he didn't know what to expect, but his feet moved forward. The curtain fell behind him and the noise of the plane dulled. He walked slowly down the aisle and stopped beside her seat. "Would you mind some company?" he asked. Ruth looked up at him with eyes that had seen more than he could imagine. "Not at all," she said gently. "I've been meaning to tell you something." And just like that, Theo sat down. Not in a seat of luxury, but a seat of something far deeper. The story was just beginning. Theo hadn't planned to sit in that seat again, not in first class, not after giving it away. But somehow, as he lowered himself into the chair beside Ruth, it didn't feel like returning. It felt like stepping into something new. The curtain behind them rustled softly, separating the front of the plane from the rest. The noise faded into the background, just a low hum of engines and a few muffled snores. Here everything was still. Ruth smiled at him. Her eyes were clear now, steady, like she had finally settled into herself. Her hands rested lightly on a worn brown bag in her lap, fingers twitching slightly as if holding on to more than just the fabric. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "No need," Theo replied, almost awkwardly. "It really was just a seat." Ruth chuckled, a low, gentle sound. "It may have been just a seat to you," she said, "but it was strength to me. You saw what others ignored." Theo didn't know how to respond. He looked out the window briefly. The stars were still there, scattered across the night sky like a soft reminder that the world was wide and full of things he didn't understand. "I want to show you something," Ruth said, reaching into her bag. From it, she pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The edges were creased, the surface soft from time and touch. She held it out to Theo with care, like she was handing over something more fragile than it looked. Theo hesitated, then took it. He unfolded the paper slowly. It was a certificate, years old, printed in faded ink on thick paper. At the top was the name of an organization he didn't recognize. Below it, a title, Founding Director, Ruth Anaba. And at the bottom, several stamps and signatures. One from the Ministry of Health, another from an international aid group. "I don't understand," Theo said softly. Ruth nodded. "You wouldn't. That's the point." She leaned back in her seat, eyes thoughtful. "I spent 30 years building health centers and safe houses in regions where women and children had nowhere else to go. I worked in villages, cities, war zones. Never asked for cameras, never wanted awards." Theo blinked. He remembered reading articles about places like those. Names of people who built peace in quiet ways. Names that didn't make headlines but saved lives. Ruth Anaba. It sounded familiar now, like something he'd once seen in a footnote on a humanitarian website. "You started all that?" he asked. She smiled gently. "With a few coins and a lot of stubbornness." Theo looked down at the paper again, realizing he was holding a piece of history. Not just a document, but a story. A legacy. I'm not sure what to say, he admitted. You don't need to say anything, Ruth said. You already did more than most. You acted. Without knowing who I was, without asking for anything. Theo looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just a tired traveler. She was someone who had given her whole life to others, quietly, completely. And he had almost missed it. I don't think I deserve your thanks, he said. Ruth tilted her head. But you earned it. She reached into her bag again, this time, pulling out a small leather notebook. It was old and marked with notes in fine handwriting. She flipped through a few pages, then stopped and slowly tore one out. She folded it neatly and handed it to him. What's this? Theo asked, holding the note like it might fall apart. A pass, she said, to my foundation. We don't advertise it. We don't give out many. That one's special. You can use it to fund something good, something that matters. Theo opened the folded paper. Inside, written in careful script, were simple but powerful words. Full access to a NABA trust. Any project, any purpose. Use with intent. Beneath it was a personal number, a name, and a seal. I don't even know what I'd use this for, he said, overwhelmed. You will, she replied. Maybe not today, but someday, when you're ready. He stared at the note in his hand, heart thudding. This wasn't just a kind thank you, it was an invitation. A door to a different kind of world. A world built on helping, not just designing. On impact, not image. Ruth leaned back again, her voice quieter now. I gave my life to building things too. Not towers or museums like you, but safety, shelter, stories that didn't make the front page. Theo nodded slowly. For the first time, he felt like he truly understood her, not just as someone he helped, but as someone who had lived the kind of purpose he'd always pushed to the back of his mind. I've always built with stone and glass, he said, but maybe it's time I try building something softer. Ruth smiled again. Not softer, just deeper. The plane rocked gently, still sailing over dark seas and sleeping cities. Around them, the world remained unaware of the quiet moment unfolding in seat 2B. Theo folded the card carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. He didn't know what he'd do with it yet, but he knew it mattered. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The plane landed in Johannesburg just after sunrise. The golden light spilled through the windows, soft and warm, touching everything it could reach. Sleepy passengers stretched in their seats, rubbed their eyes, and reached for their belongings. Theo Barrett sat quietly near the back of the plane, still holding the small folded card Ruth had given him hours earlier. It didn't look like much. A simple piece of paper with delicate writing, but it felt heavier than anything he'd carried in a long time. As the plane taxied to the gate, the curtain separating first class fluttered. He glanced toward it one last time. Ruth was still there, awake, calm. Her scarf now rested on her shoulders. Her cane leaned gently against the seat. She caught his eyes and smiled. When passengers began to stand and shuffle forward, Theo hesitated. Part of him wanted to stay to say something more. But before he could move, Ruth raised her hand slightly. Go ahead, she mouthed. I'll be slower. Theo nodded, and so he stepped off the plane and into the morning. But something had shifted. The airport didn't feel the same. The air was still, but his chest felt full, like something unseen was now guiding him. He wasn't thinking about deadlines, hotel check-ins, or the conference call he'd scheduled for the afternoon. All that had faded. He was thinking about the card, about the woman, and about the simple act that had led to something far more meaningful than he could have expected. A few weeks passed. Theo returned home back to the city skyline he had helped design. His life continued, meetings, emails, projects, but he felt different now, like he was carrying a secret not meant to be locked away. Late one evening, he opened his drawer and pulled out the card. He read it again, quietly. The words hadn't changed, but something inside him had. The next morning, he made a decision. He booked a flight. This time not to meet clients or inspect buildings, but to visit Cape Town. And not for sightseeing. For something else. He found the address listed on the back of the card. It wasn't in a business district or a fancy office tower. It was a modest building tucked between a bakery and a small clothing shop. The sign outside read, Anaba Trust, Community Outreach and Impact Fund. Theo walked in, nervous and unsure. The woman at the front desk greeted him kindly. When he showed her the card, her expression changed. She stood quickly, her smile steady but surprised. "Please wait here," she said. Within minutes, he was led into a small meeting room. Nothing fancy. Just a table, chairs, and shelves filled with folders and photographs. Pictures of schools, clinics, gardens, and people smiling under hand-painted signs. Theo explained what he wanted. Not a donation, not a handshake or a press release. A project. Hiao shared an idea he'd been holding quietly for years. A community design program for kids who had never seen blueprints, never held a pencil meant for architecture. He told them about his late mother, who had worked as a teacher and always believed creativity could change lives. He wanted to name the program after her, the Marin Initiative. The staff listened, asked questions, took notes, and when he handed over the card, they nodded with quiet understanding. A week later, the first funds arrived. Months passed. Then a year. Under a mango tree in a rural village outside Nairobi, the first class opened. A long table donated chairs and walls painted by the children themselves. They didn't have tablets or projectors, but they had sketch pads. They had ideas. And they had Theo, no longer in a suit, no longer behind glass, but kneeling beside them, pointing to their drawings and asking, "What do you see here?" Word spread, but Theo never sought attention. He wanted the program to grow because of what it gave, not what it showed. Quietly, he kept going. More schools, more sketches, more dreams built from pencils and hope. Years later, after Ruth Anaba passed peacefully in her sleep, her foundation released a statement, a small tribute to a life of quiet power. In it, among stories of her work and legacy, was one simple quote. "He gave without knowing who I was, and in doing so, reminded me who I still am." Theo read the words in silence, sitting under the shade of that same mango tree. Children laughed nearby, holding drawings of buildings with curved walls and floating gardens. He looked up at the sky. What began with a seat, a moment of instinct, not strategy, had grown into something rooted in purpose, something that would last longer than stone or steel. The card she gave him? He never framed it, never displayed it, but he carried it still, not in his wallet, but in his work. Sometimes, the smallest act becomes something far greater than we ever imagine. And sometimes giving up your seat doesn't mean stepping aside. It means finally stepping into the place where you were always meant to be.